The mountain pass was silent. Mules stumbled and collapsed. Men wrapped their arms around dying animals to stay warm. Some prayed. Others screamed into the snow. Behind them, the Alps. Ahead, the land of their enemy. And leading them, a man who had waited years for this moment. Not to conquer, but to ruin something sacred. He wasn't Roman. He had never even set foot in the city. But no man in history would ever make Rome bleed as deeply as he did. He was the nightmare they hadn't seen coming. And he was forged in fire by a father who had already lost everything. In Carthage, when boys became men, they swore loyalty. But he didn't swear loyalty. He swore revenge. He was only 9 years old when he followed his father, a general scarred by Roman treachery, to the altar of Baal. There, hand over flame, the boy was bound to a vow not even death would break. He would never be a merchant, never be a statesman. He would be the blade in Carthage's wounded hand. The man Rome would come to fear was raised in a city that once ruled the Western Mediterranean, until Rome humiliated it. Sicily, gone. Its navy, sunken. Its dignity, stripped for silver, paid an annual tribute. He didn't inherit an empire, he inherited ashes. But from those ashes, he built a ghost army. And when the time came, he didn't sail to Rome, he marched. Through Spain, across Gaul, and into the white jaws of the Alps. It was suicide, winter, hunger, barbarian ambushes, altitude sickness. And the path? No path, just ice. Roman scouts laughed when they heard the rumors. Elephants crossing the Alps? It was madness, and that's why it worked. Because when the mist cleared, the mountains spat out monsters. Elephants, war-hardened men. And at their head, a general who had come to finish what his father started. Rome expected a defensive war. What they got was a storm. At the river Trebia it began. Snowfall, frozen boots, Roman arrogance. They thought they had numbers, home advantage, tradition. But they didn't have him. He used the river itself, hid men in the freezing waters overnight. When the Roman legions waded in, they were flanked, surrounded, and butchered in the slush. Thousands dead. The rest ran. Silent, shivering, back to a Senate that no longer laughed. But there was no pause, because when Rome hesitated, he moved. Lake Trasimene, one of the largest ambushes in history. He lured a full Roman force into a fog-drenched valley. On the ridges above, silence, until the signal. Then, chaos. The hills rained death. 15,000 Romans were cut down in minutes. Most never even saw who killed them. The road to Rome was open. The Republic trembled. But not for long, because in that moment of fear, Rome did what it always did best: adapt. They didn't send a lion, they sent a shadow. Quintus Fabius Maximus, a man who fought with silence. He burned crops, emptied villages, starved the enemy slowly, never attacking, never retreating. To the Senate, cowardice. To the people, betrayal. But to the enemy, it was suffocation. The invader desecrated temples, razed cities, mocked sacred rites, trying to bait Fabius into battle. But Fabius never took the bait, because he wasn't trying to win, he was trying to wait. Rome called him the delayer, and then they removed him, because the people wanted blood, they wanted a hero. What they got was canny. He allowed 80,000 Roman soldiers to march right into his trap. He let them push, encouraged them to crush his center, and then his cavalry snapped shut on both flanks. Double envelopment. The rarest maneuver in military history. Nowhere to run, nowhere to fight. The air itself became a weapon, thick with dust, sweat, and screams. By nightfall, Over 50,000 Romans were dead. The fields were too red to farm for years. Rome had never seen loss like this. They thought he would march on the city. Even his generals begged, "Strike now, end it." But he didn't. Because Rome still had walls, still had allies, and he had learned long ago, swords kill men, but fear kills nations. So he waited. He let Rome rot. Cities defected, senators panicked. For the first time in centuries, Rome tasted doubt. And that should have been the end. But he underestimated what Rome really was. Rome was not a place. It was a pattern. It broke, bled, bent, but never shattered. And it was about to strike back. So what happens when the most brilliant general in ancient history finally returns home, to find betrayal waiting for him? They say no army could defeat him, but what if his final enemy wasn't an army at all? Years passed. Rome changed. It stopped chasing. It started striking. Not in Italy, but in Carthage. In a stunning reversal, a young Roman general, Scipio, landed in North Africa. He didn't just invade, he devoured the Carthaginian countryside, burning supply chains, smashing outposts, cutting off grain. And for the first time in 16 years, the Carthaginian Senate did the unthinkable. They sent for him. He didn't return in triumph, he returned in silence. Because what he found wasn't the city he had sworn to defend. It was the city that had already decided to blame him. The Senate whispered behind closed doors. Merchants cursed his name. His campaigns had drained their coffers. Old rivals stirred. Even his army was gone. The warriors of Cannae, dead. The cavalry of Trasimene, scattered. The veterans who had bled with him through Spain, Gaul, and Italy, buried in foreign soil. What stood in their place? Conscripts, mercenaries, teenagers with spears. But he still led them, because there was no one else. And so it came to Zama, a flat, sun-blasted plain with no trees, no cover, no advantage. The worst possible ground, for him. Across the dust stood Scipio, calm, prepared, patient. He had studied every one of Hannibal's victories, and he had come to reverse them all. The elephants charged first. But Scipio had seen it before. He left corridors in his ranks. The beasts thundered forward and slipped harmlessly through the gaps. Roman trumpets shrieked. Javelins flew. Wounded, panicked, the elephants turned, right back into the Carthaginian lines. Chaos before the first blade had even been drawn. And then the legions advanced. At the center, Hannibal's last real soldiers, the Iron Corps, stood firm, shield to shield, spear to spear. He fought among them, not as a commander, but as a man who had nothing left to lose. For a moment they held, but Scipio had planned for that too. His cavalry, Numidian allies, once Hannibal's own, had circled behind. The signal came, and it became canny in reverse. Trapped, surrounded, slaughtered. There was no mercy, no quarter, no prisoners. The dust swallowed the cries. And when the wind cleared, Carthage was broken. But that wasn't the real defeat. That came later. Because Rome didn't kill him. They let him live. But not as a hero, as a symbol. Of failure, of limits, of the man who almost broke them and didn't. He returned to a city that no longer wanted him, stripped of command, watched by spies, feared by his own government. They didn't build him a monument. They handed him a ledger. Fix the economy, they said. He did. He reformed the treasury, caught embezzlers, strengthened Carthage's finances from within. But that only made him more dangerous. Because Rome wasn't done. They sent envoys, then accusations, then demands. Exile him, disown him, deliver him. The Carthaginian Senate agreed. The same men who had once begged for his return now betrayed him again. So he ran from city to city, kingdom to kingdom. He became a ghost, a wandering strategist. He advised kings, planned fortifications, designed defenses. But no court could protect him forever. because Rome never stopped hunting. Not to fight him, to erase him. Eventually, they found him. In Bithynia, on the Black Sea coast. His hosts, bribed and cornered by Roman envoys, agreed to turn him in. He saw it coming. He withdrew to a quiet room, slipped a vial from his robes, and drank. His final words? "Let us relieve the Romans of the fear which has so long disturbed them, since it seems they have found it too burdensome to wait for an old man's death." And so the man who had crossed the Alps on elephant back, who had surrounded Rome's mightiest armies, who had nearly toppled the greatest empire the ancient world had ever seen, died in silence,